Elara, a wisp of a girl no older than 10, shivered as the damp chill of the London-like alley seeped into her threadbare coat. Her days were a quiet struggle, solitary dance with hunger and the looming shadows of the city's grand indifferent buildings. Since the orphanage, a place of cold comfort and even colder rules, had deemed her unmanageable for her quiet defiance, the cobbled streets had become her reluctant home. Yet, beneath her solemn exterior, a spark of resilience flickered, a quiet kindness that sought out the smallest glimmers of light in the pervasive gloom. Her sharp, observant eyes, honed by necessity, caught sight of a figure huddled beneath the grimy archway of an abandoned shop. He was an older man, his face a canvas of weathered lines, his clothes a patchwork of neglect. A tattered cap obscured much of his face, and a worn satchel, seemingly his only worldly possession, lay beside him like a silent sentinel. Elara had seen many such figures, lost souls drifting through the city's vastness. But something about this man's utter stillness, even in sleep, drew her in, a shared sense of being forgotten. In her small, trembling hand, a slightly bruised apple, her meager prize from an early morning scavenge, felt heavy. Her stomach, a constant companion of emptiness, protested fiercely. But as her gaze lingered on the man, a pure, unselfish thought bloomed in her young mind. He looked so utterly defeated, so profoundly cold. Perhaps, just perhaps, this small, precious offering could bring a fleeting moment of warmth to his desolate world. With a silent resolve, Elara made her decision, a tiny act of generosity that would unknowingly set the wheels of an extraordinary fate into motion. With a heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs, Elara approached the sleeping man. The alley, usually bustling with the distant echoes of city life, felt eerily quiet, amplifying her footsteps. She knelt carefully, placing the apple gently on the ground beside his satchel. Ensuring it rested securely against the grimy brickwork, for a long moment, she simply watched him. Noting the deep furrows etched into his brow, the gray stubble that shadowed his chin. He stirred slightly, a soft, weary sigh escaping his lips, and Elara froze, ready to vanish into the shadows if he awoke. But he settled back into his deep slumber, oblivious to the quiet gift left at his side. Elara lingered, a silent, watchful guardian, over her small offering. She wished, with a fierce ache in her young heart, that she had more to give, a warm blanket, a steaming cup of tea, anything to chase away the bone-deep chill that seemed to cling to him. But the apple was all she possessed, a tangible symbol of her small, yet profound act of compassion. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a rare and fleeting expression, as she imagined him waking to find the unexpected treat. It was a brief moment of quiet joy in her otherwise bleak existence, a warmth that spread through her own chilled fingers. Satisfied, Elara quietly rose and melted back into the deeper shadows of the alley. She didn't look back, but the image of the sleeping man and the small red apple remained etched in her mind, a vivid counterpoint to the usual gray of her days. She felt a lightness in her step, a sense of purpose that transcended her own gnawing hunger. She had given what little she could, and in doing so, had received something intangible in return, the quiet, profound satisfaction of a selfless act. Little did she know, this simple gesture was not an inclusion, but the very first whisper of a tale far grander and more intricate than she could ever conceive. Hours later, as the first hesitant rays of morning light began to paint the ancient brickwork with a faint, dusty glow, the man beneath the archway stirred. His eyes, accustomed to the perpetual dimness, slowly adjusted, taking in the familiar, grimy surroundings of his makeshift bed. He stretched, his joints protesting with a series of weary creaks, and reached for his worn satchel. His fingers brushed against something cool and firm, something unexpected. He paused, his brow furrowed in confusion, then looked down. A small, slightly bruised apple lay neatly beside his meager belongings. Thomas, as he was known to himself and the occasional hurried passer-by, hadn't seen an unblemished piece of fruit in what felt like a lifetime. Suspicion, a constant and unwelcome companion in his life on the streets, flared briefly. Who would leave this? Was it a cruel joke, a taunt? But as he picked it up, feeling its smooth, cool skin, the thought of a prank seemed utterly absurd. No one wasted food, especially not on a vagrant. He scanned the deserted alley, but there was no one in sight, only the distant, awakening sounds of the city. A faint, almost forgotten warmth stirred within him, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He took a cautious bite, the crisp, sweet juice, a shocking burst of flavor on his parched palate, a stark contrast to the stale bread and lukewarm tea that usually comprised his meals. As he ate, his mind drifted, trying to conjure an image of his benefactor. He remembered a fleeting shadow, a small figure he'd seen darting away, just as he drifted off into a restless sleep. A young girl, with eyes that seemed too old for her tender face. A flicker of something akin to hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar emotion he usually suppressed, sparked in his weary heart. This simple apple, a gift from an unknown hand, felt like a whisper of unexpected kindness in a world that had long been silent and unforgiving. The following morning, an irresistible pull drew Elara back to the same grimy alley. A part of her hoped the man would be gone, that the apple had served its purpose. It's a fleeting moment of comfort, and he had moved on to a better place. Another part, a deeper, more curious part, yearned to see if her small gift had been received, if it had made even the slightest difference. As she rounded the familiar corner, her breath hitched in her throat. He was there, sitting up, his back against the cold brick, slowly sipping from a chipped, steaming mug. The apple core lay neatly beside him, a silent, poignant testament to her offering. Thomas looked up, his gaze usually guarded and distant, met hers. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a quiet, almost imperceptible acknowledgement. He raised the mug slightly, a silent, humble gesture of thanks. Elara felt a blush creep up her neck, a rare warmth in her often chilled existence, but she didn't look away. Instead, she offered a small, tentative smile, an even rarer expression on her usually solemn face. It was a moment of profound, unspoken communication, a fragile bridge built between two solitary souls by a single, simple act of kindness. The biting chill in the air seemed to lessen, replaced by a fragile sense of connection that transcended words. She didn't speak, knowing her quiet words would likely be lost or unwelcome in this silent exchange. He didn't speak either, perhaps out of habit or perhaps because there were no words truly needed. They simply existed in the same space, sharing the quiet morning, a silent understanding passing between them. Elara noticed a small, intricately carved wooden bird clutched in his hand, its wings smooth and worn from years of handling. It seemed utterly out of place among his rough, meager possessions, a delicate fragment of a life once lived. A hint of a past far richer than his present circumstances suggested. This small detail deepened her curiosity about the man, hinting at a story yet untold. Days bled into weeks, and their silent encounters in the alley blossomed into a quiet, almost sacred routine. Elara would often pass by, sometimes leaving a small scavenged treat, a piece of stale bread, a few wild berries gathered from a forgotten patch, always placed discreetly, never drawing attention to herself. Thomas, in turn, would acknowledge her with a subtle nod, a slight tilt of his head, or a brief, almost imperceptible smile that softened the hard, weary lines of his face. Their bond was forged not in words, but in the profound silence of mutual understanding, built on small acts of generosity and quiet, shared observation. Other street dwellers, and even some of the more observant shopkeepers, began to notice the unusual pair. Whispers followed Elara as she moved through the bustling market, and curious, sometimes suspicious glances were cast at Thomas. The quiet girl and the old vagrant, they'd murmur, their tones a mixture of pity, disdain, and a strange, uncomprehending curiosity. Elara, accustomed to being overlooked, felt a strange, new sense of belonging in this unspoken connection, a feeling she hadn't experienced since her parents had vanished years ago, leaving her to the mercy of a harsh world. Thomas, for his part, had long since learned to ignore the judging stares and the hurried footsteps of those who wished to avoid him. But Elara's presence was different, a gentle, persistent warmth that chipped away at the hardened shell he had built around himself. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand anything, simply offered what little she had, expecting nothing in return. He found himself, to his own surprise, looking forward to her fleeting appearances, a small, consistent beacon of light in the endless gray of his days. He wondered about her, about the story behind her solemn eyes, and her quiet, unwavering generosity. Sensing a shared loneliness that resonated deep within his own weary soul, one particularly dreary afternoon, a persistent drizzle turned the already slick, cobbled streets into treacherous gleaming ribbons. Elara, seeking what little shelter she could find from the relentless damp, found herself once again in the familiar, damp alley. Thomas was there, huddled deeper into his corner, a thin, threadbare blanket pulled tightly over his shoulders. He looked colder than usual, his face pale and drawn, and a shiver ran through Elara, despite her own discomfort. She wished, with a fierce ache, for something truly warm to offer him, something more substantial than a scavenged apple. As she sat quietly a little distance away, trying to make herself as small as possible, Elara pulled out a small, worn sketchbook and a stub of a pencil she'd found weeks ago. It was her secret solace. A private world where she could capture the fleeting beauty she sometimes glimpsed in the harsh, unforgiving city, the intricate patterns of a wrought iron fence, the delicate curve of a forgotten flower. She began to sketch, her nimble fingers moving with surprising grace, capturing the intricate patterns of the damp brickwork and the glistening puddles. Unbeknownst to her, Thomas had stirred, his eyes slowly opening, drawn by the faint scratching sound of the pencil on paper. He watched her, captivated by the focused intensity on her young face. When she finally looked up, her gaze met his, and she saw his eyes fixed on her sketchbook. A blush again crept up her cheeks, a familiar warmth, but this time there was no fear, only a slight embarrassment at being observed in her private world. She held out the sketchbook, offering it to him with a hesitant gesture. Thomas hesitated for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took it. His rough, calloused fingers carefully turned the pages, revealing sketches of pigeons pecking at crumbs, the elegant curve of an old lamppost, the gnarled roots of a street tree. His eyes widened slightly as he saw the detail, the life Elara had breathed into her simple drawings. He looked at her, a flicker of something akin to awe in his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of her hidden talent. Thomas carefully handed the sketchbook back to Elara, a new, profound respect evident in his eyes. He then reached slowly into his worn satchel, pulling out a small, tarnished silver pocket watch. It was old, its casing scratched and dented, and the glass face was cracked, rendering the hands useless. He held it out to her, a silent offering, a gesture that spoke volumes of trust and vulnerability. It was Elara instinctively knew, something deeply personal, a relic from a life he rarely spoke of, a tangible piece of his mysterious past. Elara took the watch gently, her small fingers carefully tracing the intricate, faded engravings on its back. It felt cool and surprisingly heavy in her palm, a tangible piece of his unspoken history. She examined the cracked glass, the broken mechanism, a frown of deep concentration on her young face. She wasn't sure what he wanted her to do with it, but she felt a strong, compelling urge to understand its significance, its story. It was a moment of shared vulnerability, a silent plea for connection that transcended their usual unspoken interactions, a new depth to their quiet bond. Thomas watched her, a flicker of something unreadable, yet deeply emotional, in his eyes. This watch was his last tangible link to a life he'd lost, a constant painful reminder of what he'd once possessed. He'd shown it to no one, unwilling to expose such a fragile, precious piece of himself to the harshness of the streets. Yet with Elara, it felt different. Her quiet understanding, her gentle, knowing hands, seemed capable of holding not just the watch, but the immense weight of its memories. He wondered if she could see the faded, almost imperceptible inscription on the back. A name he hadn't spoken aloud in years, a name that still echoed in the chambers of his broken heart. The persistent drizzle had intensified, turning into a full-blown, relentless downpour that hammered against the city's ancient stones and echoed through the narrow alley. The archway offered little protection, and the biting cold began to seep into Elara's bones, making her shiver uncontrollably. Thomas, noticing her trembling, gestured towards a slightly more sheltered alcove deeper within the alley, a small recessed space beneath a crumbling archway. It was a small, almost imperceptible invitation, but Elara understood. She moved closer, huddling beside him, seeking what little warmth their shared proximity could offer, a silent acknowledgement of their growing bond. The sounds of the storm raged around them, a cacophony of drumming rain and howling wind, muffling the usual distant hum of city life. In the sudden and forced intimacy of their shared shelter, Thomas spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, barely audible above the drumming rain. "It belonged to my boy," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the broken watch Elara still held, his fingers tracing the cracked glass. He loved to watch the gears turn, said it was like magic, a tiny world of its own. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, a raw edge of profound grief Elara hadn't heard before, a stark glimpse into the devastating loss that had shaped his solitary existence. Elara looked at him, her eyes wide with sorrow and a deep, empathetic understanding. She didn't know what to say, but words felt inadequate anyway, too small to encompass the vastness of his pain. She simply reached out, her small hand gently covering his on the watch, a silent, powerful gesture of comfort and shared sorrow. In that moment, the last fragile barrier between them dissolved completely. He was no longer just the homeless man, and she was no longer just the quiet orphan. They were two souls, battered and broken by the cruel hand of fate, finding solace and an unexpected connection in each other's silent presence amidst the raging storm. The revelation of his son's name, Daniel, and the story of the fire seemed to unlock something profound within Thomas. He began to speak, slowly at first, in fragmented, hesitant sentences, then with a growing urgency, as if years of suppressed memories were finally demanding release. He told Elara of a life before the streets, a life filled with the warmth of a small, humble home, the rhythmic ticking of clocks, and the laughter of a beloved family. He had been a respected clockmaker, a man who found joy in the intricate dance of gears and springs, a trade passed down through generations. His son Daniel had shared his passion, his small hands eager to learn the delicate craft. But then tragedy, swift and merciless, had struck. A devastating fire, sudden and all-consuming, had consumed their home, taking everything, including Daniel. Thomas had been away, retrieving a rare part for a difficult repair, and had returned to find only smoldering ashes and the crushing, unbearable weight of loss. He had tried to rebuild, to carry on, to face the world, but the grief was too heavy, the memories too painful, too overwhelming. He had drifted, losing himself in the city's labyrinthine streets. The broken watch his only tangible link to the life he had lost, a constant, agonizing reminder of his perceived failure to protect his son. Elara listened, her eyes wide with sorrow and a profound, aching understanding. She saw the raw, unadulterated pain in his gaze, the deep regret that had driven him to this desolate existence on the streets. Her own orphanhood, her own profound loneliness, suddenly felt less unique. Her sorrow mirrored in his. She reached out, taking his rough, calloused hand, a silent promise of unwavering companionship, a shared burden. In that moment, their individual grief became a powerful, binding force, a fragile foundation upon which something new and utterly unexpected could begin to grow. A fragile hope blossoming in the heart of the cold, indifferent city. The revelation of Eleanor, Thomas's lost wife, added another layer of profound melancholy to their quiet existence. Elara, with her innate empathy, sensed the unspoken grief that still clung to him, a sorrow that went beyond the loss of his son. She often found him tracing the faded name Eleanor on the watch, his gaze distant, lost in memories of a love that had been tragically cut short. It was clear that his wife's passing, perhaps even before Daniel's, had been another devastating blow, contributing significantly to his downward spiral into homelessness and despair. Elara wondered if there was even more to the story. Another layer of sorrow hidden beneath the surface of his pain, another secret waiting to be unveiled. One afternoon, while Elara was sketching a bustling street scene, capturing the fleeting movements of passers-by, a well-dressed woman, impeccably attired in a dark, sensible coat and a stylish hat, paused near their alley. She carried a small, leather-bound book and seemed to be observing the intricate architecture of the old, crumbling buildings with an almost academic interest. She turned, her gaze swept casually over Thomas, who was attempting to repair a broken buckle on his worn satchel. Her eyes widened slightly in a flicker of something unreadable. Surprise, perhaps, or a fleeting, almost imperceptible recognition crossed her refined face. Thomas, engrossed in his task, didn't notice her, his world narrowed to the small, broken buckle in his hands. Elara, however, did. She watched the woman, whose elegant presence seemed so utterly out of place in their grimy, forgotten corner of the city. The woman hesitated for a long moment, her gaze lingering, then continued on her way, disappearing around the corner with a rustle of her coat. Elara felt a prickle of unease, a strange premonition. There was something about the woman's reaction, a subtle shift in her composure that suggested more than just casual observation. It was a fleeting encounter, but it left Elara with a strange, unsettling feeling, a sense that their quiet, fragile world might soon be disrupted by echoes from Thomas's deeply buried past. The fleeting encounter with the mysterious woman gnawed at Elara's young mind. She couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that the woman had recognized Thomas, and that her brief, lingering pause held a deeper, unspoken significance. She tried to describe the woman to Thomas, detailing her elegant attire and her curious gaze. But his memory was hazy, dulled by years of hardship and a deliberate, painful effort to forget his past. He dismissed it as a simple passerby, a momentary curiosity. But Elara's intuition, sharpened by years of navigating the treacherous streets alone, told her otherwise. A distinct sense of impending drama, a subtle shift in their quiet existence, began to settle over their fragile lives. A few days later, as Thomas was attempting to mend a stubborn tear in his threadbare coat, a small, worn photograph slipped from an inner. It was old and faded, its edges softened by time and countless touches. But Elara could still make out the faint image of a smiling woman, her arm linked with a younger, happier Thomas. The woman had kind, gentle eyes and a soft smile, and around her neck, Elara noticed a familiar, delicate locket, the very one she had found earlier, now revealed as belonging to Eleanor Thomas's lost wife. But what truly caught Elara's eye, sending a jolt through her small frame, was the small child clutched tenderly in the woman's other arm, a baby with a shock of light, wispy hair. "Daniel?" Elara whispered, her voice barely audible, pointing to the tiny innocent face of the child. Thomas nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the photograph, a profound, aching sadness in his eyes. But then Elara noticed something else, something that made her heart pound with a sudden, overwhelming force. The baby in the photograph had a distinctive birthmark on its left wrist, tiny star-shaped mark, almost hidden by the folds of its clothing. Elara's own hand instinctively went to her wrist, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of her own hidden mark. She knew that mark. She had the same one hidden beneath the cuff of her worn sleeve, a secret she'd always believed was unique to her, a singular identifier that now impossibly connected her to this faded image and the man beside her. Elara's hand instinctively went to her own wrist, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of the star-shaped birthmark, a secret she had carried all her life. Her mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the impossible truth that was unfolding before her. Could it be? The child in the photograph, Daniel, had the same mark? A wave of disbelief, followed by a surge of overwhelming, dizzying emotion, washed over her. She looked from the faded photograph to Thomas, her eyes wide with a question she dared not voice, a hope too fragile to speak aloud. Thomas, still engrossed in his own profound grief, seemed not to notice her reaction. His gaze still fixed on the faded image of his lost family, a world that had vanished in flames. "Alice Mark," Elara finally managed, her voice barely a whisper, thick with emotion.
Ow.
As she pulled back her worn sleeve to reveal her own small wrist. "I have it too, the same one."
Hey.
Thomas slowly looked up, his eyes clouded by years of sorrow and despair, finally focusing on her outstretched arm. His breath hitched in his throat, a sharp, sudden gasp. He leaned closer, his fingers trembling uncontrollably as he traced the small, star-shaped mark on her wrist. His gaze flickered back and forth, from the photograph to Elara's face, a dawning, miraculous realization slowly replacing the deep-seated grief in his eyes, a flicker of light in the long darkness. A profound, almost sacred silence descended upon the alley, broken only by the distant, muffled hum of the city and the rapid beating of their hearts. Thomas's hand, still trembling, reached out to gently cup Elara's cheek, his touch feather-light, as if she might vanish. "Elara," he whispered, his voice choked with raw, overwhelming emotion, barely audible. "My Daniel, ... he had a twin, a girl. She was so small, so fragile. The doctors, after the fire, they told me she didn't survive. They said she perished in the flames. But they were wrong. You, ... you are my daughter. You are Elara, my Eleanor. The truth, shattering and miraculous, hung in the cold, damp air, transforming their world in an instant, binding them together in a destiny neither could have ever imagined. And so, dear viewers, our inspiring tale of when generosity meets fate comes to a close. We hope Elara and Thomas's incredible journey has touched your hearts and reminded you of the extraordinary power of compassion, the unexpected twists of fate, and the enduring strength of family found in the most unlikely of places. Their story is a testament to the fact that even when life deals its harshest blows, a single act of kindness can spark a miracle. If this story moved you, please give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to our YouTube channel for more powerful and heartwarming stories that will inspire and uplift you. Thank you for watching.